How's it going, friend? How are we doing? Today I'm going to tell you a secret that many veteran ranchers already know, but the new ones are just discovering. Earless forage maize is one of the best things you can give your livestock. And you're probably wondering how so without the ear. Isn't the grain the best part of the corn? Well, look, here's the thing. When you grow corn for forage without letting it form an ear, the plant concentrates all its energy in leaves, stalk, and green biomass. And that biomass is full of nutrients that your cows are going to use like crazy. This system will allow you to produce a massive amount of high-quality forage in a small space using less water than other crops. And best of all, you're going to see how your cows produce more milk and your steers fatten up faster. It doesn't matter if you have 10 cows or 200, this system works. It doesn't matter if you have top-notch land or a tiny piece of ground. With good management, forage maize will get you out of trouble during droughts and give you quality forage when you need it most. So grab your notebook, your pencil, and let's dive into everything you need to know to produce earless forage maize. I'm going to tell you from how to prepare the land to how and when to cut it, including all the tricks I've learned and that old-timers who've been doing it for years have told me. Come on, let's go all out. First things first, let's clear up what the heck this earless forage maize is. Normal forage maize is when you plant corn and let it grow until it forms the ear, and then you cut it and chop it all together. Stalk, leaves, ear, and all. That's called whole plant silage, and it's very good. But earless forage maize is different. What you do is plant the corn with high density, tighter than when you plant it for grain, and you cut it before it forms the ear. Or in some cases, you use special varieties that almost don't form an ear. And why would you do this? Well, friend, there are several really good reasons. First of all, you produce more total biomass per hectare. When corn forms an ear, it spends a lot of energy and nutrients on making those grains. If you don't let it make an ear, all that energy stays in the plant. More leaves, thicker stalks, more green. In the end, you get more tons of fresh forage per hectare. Second, the forage is more digestible. The leaves and stalks of the corn before the ear matures are more tender, softer, easier for livestock to digest. The stalk of a mature corn is hard as a stick, but the stalk of a young corn is juicy, and the cows eat it happily. Third, you can do several cuts in the ear. If you cut the corn young, depending on the variety and the climate, it can sprout back and give you another cut. With grain corn, you only have one harvest a year. With earless forage, you can have 2 or even 3 cuts. Fourth, you use less water. Since you don't let the plant reach full maturity, the cycle is shorter and you need fewer waterings. In areas where water is scarce, this is pure gold. Fifth, it's cheaper. You don't need to harvest ears, shell, or store grain. Everything is chopped and used fresh or ensiled. Less machinery, less work, less expense. Now, obviously, you lose the grain, which is very nutritious, but you make up for it with the volume and quality of the green forage. At the end of the day, your animals are going to receive very good nutrition, and you are going to produce more forage with fewer resources. Earless forage maize is especially good for dairy cows because they need high-quality and digestible forage to produce milk. It also works excellently for steers being fattened because they gain weight fast with this forage. Now let's get to the important part. What corn to plant? You can't just grab any corn seed and expect good results. There are specific varieties that work better for earless forage. What you're looking for is a variety that has these characteristics. High production of vegetative biomass. This means that the plant produces many leaves in a thick stalk. There are forage maize varieties that are designed specifically for this. For example, BMR-type forage hybrids have stalks with less lignin, which is what makes the plant tough. They are more digestible. You also need shorter cycle varieties. For earless forage, you don't need varieties that take 4 or 5 months to mature. With varieties of 90 to 110 days, it's perfect. Some ranchers even use earlier varieties of 70 to 90 days to make several cuts a year. Look also for good leaf production, because the leaves are the most nutritious part of forage maize. Look for varieties that have many leaves and wide leaves. There are forage hybrids that produce up to 18 to 20 leaves per plant. The tolerance to high density is also critical. Since you are going to plant tighter than for grain, you need a variety that doesn't fall over or get sick when it is very close to other plants. And the most important thing of all, you need a variety adapted to your area. A variety that works excellently in hot land can be a disaster in cold land, and vice versa. Ask at your local agricultural supply store what forage maize varieties work well in your region. Some popular varieties for forage include Pioneer, DeKalb, and Syngenta hybrids specific for forage. They normally come labeled as silage or forage in English or forajero in Spanish. You can also use local heirloom varieties if they have good biomass production. High-statured heirloom corns can work well, although they won't produce as much as modern hybrids. A trick that some old-timer ranchers use is mixing a grain variety with a forage one. Plant 70% of pure forage and 30% of a normal grain variety. That way you get a good volume of forage, but also some grain in some ears. It's a middle ground. My recommendation is that you try with a modern forage hybrid in your first planting. Yes, the seed is more expensive, but the production you get makes up for it. Later, when you already have experience, you can experiment with cheaper or heirloom varieties. Well, friend, now comes the heavy work, preparing the land. Corn is noble, but it needs a good bed to develop well. You can't just throw the seed in a pasture without preparing it and expect miracles. First of all, select a good piece of land. Corn prefers deep, loose soils with good drainage. It doesn't like very clayey soils that get waterlogged, nor very sandy ones that don't retain any water or nutrients. If your soil's a bit heavy, meaning clayey, you're going to need to work it well to loosen it. If it's very sandy, it's best to incorporate organic matter. The steps to prepare the terrain are several and all important. First, cleaning. Remove all the weeds, big stones, and residues from previous harvests. If there was grass or brush, break it up well or burn it where it is allowed. Leave the terrain clean. Then comes the first step of plowing or harrowing. Pass a disc plow or a heavy harrow to break the soil. This is done to turn the earth, bury the stubble, and break large clods. If you have a tractor, perfect. If not, find someone to plow for you or use oxen if there are any in your area. The depth should be about 25 to 30 cm. After the first step of plowing, let the earth rest for a few days. This allows it to air out, for any weed seeds that were left to germinate so you can kill them later, and for the soil to settle a bit. Now you pass a lighter harrow to crumble the clods and leave the earth fine. What you are looking for is a loose, even soil without large clods. This facilitates planting and ensures the seed has good contact with the earth. If your terrain has small hills and holes, try to level it as much as possible. This helps for irrigation and ensures that the water doesn't stagnate in low parts. If you are going to plant in furrows, this is the moment to make them. The furrows for high-density forage maize generally go at 60 or 70 centimeters between furrow and furrow. If you are going to plant with a mechanical planter, you only need to leave the earth even. Now, an important fact, corn sucks up quite a lot of nutrients from the soil, especially nitrogen. If you can, before the last harrowing, incorporate some fertilizer. It can be well-decomposed manure, 2 or 3 tons per hectare if you have it, compost, or even chopped vegetable residues. If you have the chance to do a soil analysis, do it. They will tell you exactly what your land is missing and how much fertilizer you need. But if you can't, the general rule is that corn needs plenty of nitrogen, some phosphorus, and a touch of potassium. A basic fertilization formula at planting would be about 100 kilos of urea and 50 kilo of DAP per hectare mixed with the earth. This gives an initial push to the little plants. We reach the key moment, putting the seed in the ground. The planting time depends on your area. In general, corn needs heat and water. If you live in an area where it rains, you plant at the start of the rains. If you have irrigation, you can plant almost all year round, although corn yields better in spring and summer. Avoid planting when a frost is coming, because corn is very delicate to the cold when it's tiny. Also avoid planting in full extreme heat without sufficient irrigation. Now, the planting density is where the trick for earless forage is. For normal grain corn, you plant about 50,000 to 60,000 plants per hectare. For earless forage, you are going to plant tighter, between 80,000 and 120,000 plants per hectare. Why more crowded? Because you are looking for more plants, more leaves, and more total biomass. The plants are going to grow thinner and with less individual stalk thickness, but you will have many more per square meter. The distance between furrows can be 60 to 70 centimeters. Inside the furrow, The plants go every 10 to 15 millimeters, depending on how tight you want to plant. If you do the math with furrows at 70 centimeters and plants every 12 centimeter inside the furrow, it gives you about 95,000 plants per hectare. There you are in the correct range. How do you plant? You have several options: manual planting with a chuso or dibber if it's a small plot. You can plant by hand. You make a little hole with a stick or chuso of about 5 centimeters deep. You drop 2 seeds in case one doesn't germinate. You cover and move on. It's tiring, but it works. Planting with an animal-drawn planter if you have oxen or horses. There are manual planters that you can pull with them. They regulate the distance between seeds and do the work faster. Planting with a tractor if you have a tractor or can rent one. A mechanical planter does the work for you in a bit. You just need to calibrate it for the correct distance. The planting depth is important. 4 to 6 centimeter is ideal. Deeper and the seed takes long to sprout or doesn't sprout. Shallower and the birds eat it or the sun dries it out. After planting, if you can, pass a roller or a board to flatten the ground so that the seed has good contact. This helps germination. If you have gravity irrigation, irrigate immediately after planting. If it's sprinkler irrigation, give it a light spray. If you planted with the rains, trust that the sky will do its part. An old-timer trick: some ranchers mix the seed with a little ash or gypsum before planting. This helps the seeds to be seen so they don't get eaten as much when they germinate, and it also provides some calcium. Another trick: if you have a problem with birds eating the seed, you can treat it with some commercial repellent or the old method of soaking it in diluted kerosene, but without overdoing it because you can kill the seed. Corn germination takes between 5 and 8 days depending on the soil temperature. In warm soil, it germinates fast. In cold soil, it takes longer. Once your corn has already sprouted and is growing, management comes. Here is where you separate a good crop from a regular one. Let's talk first about irrigation. Corn needs water, but not waterlogging. The ideal is to maintain the soil moist, but not soaked. In the first weeks after germination, irrigate often, but with little water. The little plants are tiny and need constant moisture. Light waterings every 3 or 4 days. When the plants are already bigger, let's say 30 to 40 centimeter high, you can space out the waterings, but give them more water. Waterings every 5 to 7 days, but deeper. The most critical stage for water is when the corn is growing fast, between 30 and 60 days after planting. There it is making all its biomass, and it can't be missing water. If it gets stressed for lack of water in that stage, production falls badly. If it's rainy season, obviously you need to irrigate little or nothing. But watch out for waterlogging. If it gets waterlogged more than 2 days in a row, the roots start to rot. If your terrain tends to get waterlogged, make drainage ditches. The total amount of water that the crop needs depends on the climate, but on average, a forage maize needs between 400 and 600 milliliters of total water during its cycle. If it rains 300 milliliters, you need to complete with irrigation the other 200 or 300. Now the fertilization. You already put fertilizer at planting, but the corn needs more food during its growth. The first additional fertilization is done when the plants are about 30 to 40 centimeter high, which is around 25 to 30 days after planting. Here you give it nitrogen, which is what it needs most to grow. You can use urea, which is cheap and effective. The dose is about 100 to 150 kilo of urea per hectare. How do you apply it? If you have well-defined furrows, you scatter the urea on the side of the furrow about 10 or 15 centimeters from the plants, not right against them because it can burn them. Then you give it a light covering with soil or simply incorporate it with irrigation. If you don't have furrows and you broadcast seeded or planted very close together, you can scatter the urea broadcast over the whole terrain and then irrigate so that it gets incorporated. Some ranchers do a second fertilization at 45 or 50 days with another 50 to 80 kilos of urea per hectare. This helps the plants finish developing all their potential. If you have liquid manure or slurry, you can also use it. It's excellent because besides the nitrogen, it provides other nutrients and organic matter. You can apply it diluted in irrigation water. An old-timer's advice: after each fertilization with chemical, irrigate well. The fertilizer needs to dissolve and enter the soil so that the roots absorb it. If you leave it dry, it gets lost through volatilization. It evaporates into the air. Now, weed control. Weeds are enemies of corn, especially at the start. They compete for water, light, and nutrients. The first 3 or 4 weeks are critical. If the weeds get out of control, they can drown your corn and lower production by half or more. You have two options: chemical or mechanical control. Chemical control means that you can use pre-emergent herbicides before the weeds sprout or post-emergent when they already have. The most common for corn are atrazine and products based on 2,4-D. But watch out, read the instructions well, because if you overdo the dose, you can damage your corn. Mechanical control is weeding by hand with a hoe or machete or passing a cultivator between the furrows. It's more work, but it's organic and you don't spend on chemicals. The first weeding is done around 15 or 20 days after planting, the second at 35 or 40 days. After that, the corn is already big and covers the soil, then the weeds don't grow as much anymore. Combining both methods also works: a herbicide at the start and then a pass of the cultivator. Corn, like all crops, has its pests and diseases. But don't be scared. Most can be managed. Let's talk about the common pests. The fall armyworm is the #1 pest of corn. It's a green or brown caterpillar that gets into the whorl, the center where the new leaves come out, and eats the tender leaves. You detect it because you see the whorl with holes and worm droppings. To control it, there are specific insecticides like chlorpyrifos, lambda-cyhalothrin, or biological products with Bacillus thuringiensis. They are applied when you see the first attacks. Don't wait until it's all eaten. The corn earworm attacks more when the ear forms, but since you are not going to let it form, it shouldn't be a major problem. Aphids are tiny bugs that suck the sap from the leaves. They are seen as black or green dots on the leaves. Normally, they are not a serious problem, but if there are many, they can weaken the plant. To control them, use systemic insecticides or simply leave them if there are not many, because they have natural enemies that control them. White grubs are white larvae that live in the soil and eat the roots. You detect them when you see plants that wilt without apparent reason. You pull the plant and it comes up without roots. To control them, use soil products before planting or granulated insecticides at the moment of planting. Birds eat the newly planted seed and also the tender corn. They are not a pest, but they are annoying. To control them, use scarecrows, nets, or treatment of the seed with repellents. Now, the common diseases. Root rots are from excess humidity or soil fungi. The plants turn yellow and fall over. To prevent them, you need good drainage. Avoid over-irrigating and use seed treated with fungicide. Leaf spot are brown or gray spots on the leaves caused by fungi. To control it, use foliar fungicides if it is serious, but in forage, normally it's not necessary because you are going to cut before it's a serious problem. Corn smut are gray pouches that come out on the leaves, stalk, or ear. It's caused by a fungus. To control it, pull out and burn the affected plants so that they don't infect the others. In general, for earless forage maize, the pests and diseases are less of a problem than for grain corn because the cycle is shorter and you harvest before many problems develop fully. The most important thing is to monitor. Walk your crop every 2 or 3 days, check the plants, and as soon as you see something weird, act fast. A small problem is easy to control. A big problem can cost you the harvest. Now comes one of the most important decisions. When to cut your forage maize? The optimal moment for cutting depends on what you are looking for, but in general for earless forage maize, you cut in one of these stages. Early cut, between 60 and 70 days after planting. At this point, the corn is in the maximum vegetative stage, very green and very juicy. The plants measure between 1.5 and 2 mm high. The forage at this moment has plenty of protein and is very digestible, but has less total energy. This cut is excellent for dairy cows because they need protein to produce milk. It's also good if you think about making several cuts because it gives the plant time to sprout back. Mid-cut, between 80 and 90 days after planting. Here the corn is already more mature, measuring 2 to 2.5 in fineness. It's starting to form the tassels, the flowers at the top, but still there is no formed ear or very small tiny ears are just starting. This is the optimal point for most cases. You have a good balance between protein and energy, high volume of biomass, and still good digestibility. Late cut, between 100 and 110 days. At this point, there are already small ears forming. The stalk is thicker and starting to harden. You have maximum production of total biomass, but digestibility starts to drop because the stalk gets woodier. This cut is good for fattening cattle that need plenty of energy, or if you want to end-sile because the dry matter is higher and the silage turns out better. How to know when it's ready? There are several signals. By days, if you know when you planted, count the days. With 80 to 90 days, you usually are at the optimal point. By height, when the plants measure between 2 and 2.5 it's a good moment for earless forage. By the bottom leaves, when the 2 or 3 leaves from further down start to turn yellow and dry, it's a sign that the plant is maturing. By flowering, when you see the tassels on top, the male flowers, and they start to release pollen, you are reaching the optimal point. An old-timer trick is to bend the stalk with your hand. If it's very tender and bends easy without breaking, it's still young. If it's firmer but still flexible, you are at a good point. If it's hard and brittle, you already passed it and it's going to be less digestible. For the cut, you need proper tools. For a small plot, you can cut with a machete. It's heavy work, but it works. You go cutting the stalk as low as possible, and you go piling it up. For more land, an adapted grass mower can serve, or better yet, a forage chopper. These machines cut and chop at the same time, leaving you the forage ready to give to the animals or to ensel. For plenty of land, if you have several hectares, you need machinery like a self-propelled forage harvester or a chopper implement pulled by a tractor. The cut is done ideally early in the morning or at sunset when it's less hot. If you cut in the blazing midday sun, the forage dehydrates very fast and you lose quality. You already cut your forage maize. Now what do you do with it? You have 3 main options. Fresh green forage for immediate consumption. This is the simplest way. You cut the corn, chop it into pieces 2 to 5 cm long with a chopper, and give it to the animals on the same day or maximum the next day. Fresh green forage is excellent, has all its nutrients intact, is juicy, cows love it, and you see immediate results in milk production or weight increase. The amount that you give each animal depends on the size and type. A dairy cow can eat between 40 and 60 kilos of fresh green forage a day. A fattening steer eats between 30 and 50 kilos. Developing calves eat between 15 and 25 kilos. Green forage can be given alone or combined with other feeds. The ideal is to combine it with some dry grass or hay and a bit of concentrate to balance the diet. The advantages are maximum nutritional quality and 0 storage costs. The disadvantages are that you have to cut and chop often. You can't store it, and if you have plenty, you don't manage to use it before it spoils. The second option is haymaking, that is, making hay. This is letting the cut forage dry until it has between 15 and 20% humidity. Once dry, you bale it and store it for later use. The process is, you cut the corn, you leave it spread in the field so that it dries in the sun, you turn it a couple of times so that it dries evenly, and when it's already dry, it crackles when you bend it. You pick it up. Forage maize hay is good, although not as good as alfalfa hay, but it works perfectly for dry seasons when there is no fresh grass. The advantages are that you can store it for months, you always have forage available, and it's useful for the dry season. The disadvantages are that you lose some nutrients in the drying, you need good sunny weather, and the process takes several days. The third option is silage. This is the most used form when you have plenty of production. Silage is forage preserved through fermentation. The basic process is, you cut and chop the corn into pieces of 1 to 3 cm. You store it in a silo, it can be trench type, tower type, or in plastic bags. You compact it very well to take out all the air. You cover it hermetically with plastic. You let it ferment for at least 3 weeks. During fermentation, natural bacteria convert the sugars of the forage into acids that preserve the material. It's like making sauerkraut or yogurt, but with grass. Forage maize silage is excellent. It preserves nutrients very well and has a good, slightly acidic taste. Cows like it, and it can last months or even a year if it's well done. To make good silage, the forage must have between 30 and 35% dry matter. If it's too watery, less than 25%, the silage comes out slimy and stinky. If it's too dry, More than 40%, it doesn't compact well and can have mold. The optimal moment to ensile Earl's forage maize is at the mid or late cut, when it already has enough dry matter but is still digestible. Now let's talk about numbers, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. How much does a hectare of Earl's forage maize produce? Yields vary a lot depending on the variety, climate, soil, and management. But in general, you can expect between 40 and 70 tons of fresh green forage per hectare in a single cut. If you do an early cut and the plant sprouts back, you can take a second cut of 20 to 30 tons more. That would give you a total of 60 to 100 tons of green forage per hectare a year. Those are very good numbers. To give you an idea, a hectare of normal grass produces between 20 and 40 tons of green forage a year. Forage maize gives you double or triple. In terms of dry matter, which is what really counts nutritionally, a hectare of forage maize produces between 12 and 20 tons of dry matter. That is enough to feed many animals during the whole year, especially if you preserve it as silage or chopped forage. Now let's move to the costs, which is where many are surprised. Forage maize, well managed, is not expensive to produce compared to what it yields. On average, the cost per hectare includes seed, soil preparation, fertilization, irrigation if applied, and cutting. Depending on the country and management, the total cost usually moves in a moderate range. But the important thing is the cost per ton produced, and their forage maize wins by a landslide. When you divide the total expense by 60, 80, or even 100 tons of green forage, the cost per ton results very low compared to buying commercial feed or even compared to producing other traditional forages. For that reason, many producers say that forage maize pays for itself. If you produce it for your own consumption, the savings are huge. Reducing the purchase of concentrates and external forages can lower livestock feeding costs by between 30 and 50%. And if you decide to sell the forage, whether fresh, chopped, or ensiled, a single well-managed hectare can leave an interesting profit, especially in dry seasons when grass is scarce and forage prices go up. Besides, there is another key point that many don't calculate. Forage maize reduces risks. Having your own food ensures that your animals don't suffer production drops for lack of grass, which translates into more milk, better fattening, and healthier animals. That is also money, although it is not always seen immediately. In summary, Earl's forage maize offers very high yields, controllable costs, and a very favorable cost-benefit relationship. Whether to feed your own livestock or as a product for sale, it is one of the most efficient and profitable crops that you can have per hectare when it's managed correctly. Anyway, you know that I always wish you a good day and very good business. And I hope with all my heart that this is your year of prosperity for you and your family. See you later, friend. If this guide on forage maize has transformed your vision about the feeding of your livestock, be sure to subscribe and give a like to our channel. We are sharing the knowledge that others prefer to keep secret so that your ranch prospers. Sow today the future of your production. The next treasure of ranching wisdom will be opened very soon.